I am Daniel Simone. I am the author of the Lufthansa Heist, among other books. Uh, and I'm chatting with Dax. It's certainly been quite a pleasure to be on his show, and I hope to be able to return again.
Welcome to this episode of Chatting with Stacks. I'm your host, Bill Stacks, and today I got Daniel Simone. What's up, man?
Good morning.
How you doing?
Very well. And yourself?
I'm doing great. Thank you for joining me. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So you have an interesting story.
Indeed, quite a few, actually.
Yeah. So where are you from? Where are you born and raised?
I was born and raised in Queens County, New York. In the Ozone Park section of Queens, which is used to be a neighborhood populated by unsavory characters, gangsters, mafia personages, and all sorts of hoodlums. So, not by choice, but by coincidence, I found myself socializing with their children, dated their daughters, went to school with their children, often dined in their homes by invitation. And so this really was my neighborhood.
And a lot of these children would grow up to be bosses themselves, right?
Certainly some of them did. Some of them were killed, whacked. Some are currently still in prison. So yes, their fates were quite predictable.
So what kind of things did you get into when you were younger? Is there any situations that happened with some of these people where
well, you know,
maybe...
we all had a degree of mischief in us, and we did mostly what street kids do. Back then, we didn't have computers, we didn't have laptops, we didn't have smartphones. So we played stickball in the street. We played basketball at the dead-end street where we had nailed a basketball hoop to a tree. And there was a fire hydrant that would cool us off in the summer. And it was an innocent, playful growing up. Unsophisticated, without technology, and we'd be out in the streets from morning until the sun went down, or until our parents called us in. And basically, it was fun. I miss it. I would not trade those days with today's modern way of growing up. And of course, but at the same time, it was adventurous. Met some very interesting characters, to say the least. And I've dedicated myself to writing at a very early age. I began writing for my local church. I used to create and write prayer pamphlets. And then, of course, I switched to crime, to writing about crime. And here I am today.
So like a Bronx Tale, right? There's situations that happen to the young man when he was a young child. He witnesses different things. Did you witness anything in the neighborhood when you were younger?
Yes, we occasionally witnessed shakedown situations where two or three guys would walk into a restaurant or into a store, shake down the owner for a weekly sum of money. We've seen occasionally two or three thugs beat up a man on a street corner, reasons that we did not know. We encountered that type of criminal activity from time to time, yes.
So when you're younger, you're starting to get older, you turn into a teenager. Do they ever try to suck you into that world?
Yes, they're always looking for recruits. There's no question about it. But I was definitely not interested in any way, shape, or form, regardless of the offers or the carrots that they would dangle. I knew better. I was a little bit more academically oriented than most of the other kids in my neighborhood that I used to hang out with. So I knew a little bit better, and I really had no temptation at all. I had no desire to take up that life because I heard stories from my uncles, my father, friends of the family, what normally would ultimately wind up happening to that type of element. So I listened, I observed, I wasn't stubborn, and I just steered away from it. Once I became a teenager, I started hanging out outside the neighborhood. I started flocking with crowds from other neighborhoods, better neighborhoods. And I also leaned into spending a great deal of time with my own element from the Nassau County area, which is a county of Long Island right adjacent to Queens. And that gave me an entirely wider view of the different lifestyles that I could choose from. And I
Yeah,
chose the academic lifestyle as opposed to being the typical daily laborer, the street type of individual who roamed around looking for a hustle, any type of hustle. I never looked for a hustle because I wanted something concrete, a career that was definitive, a career that would be rewarding and satisfying in different ways. And that is the route that I embarked on. And I
so
left many of my old friends from my adolescence. I left them behind, and what happened to them? Some I learned about them, some I read about them, some I maintained contact with. But now, much later, I don't have any vestiges at all from my early days from the Ozone Park neighborhood.
so that's it. They're pretty much all either dead or in prison or moved
Yeah,
on
yeah,
with their
which
life.
is typically what happens to that element. Very, very few of them ultimately die in their own bed and in the comfort of their own home or in the comfort of their own bed. They either get whacked in the street or they wind up dying in prison or getting killed in prison.
So there's a lot of people who came up in that world, and back then there was a lot of well-known names, right? Is there
Sure.
any names that stand out in your mind when you were younger that you remember hearing about or things going on in the neighborhood?
The Gotti brothers, for example, his sons, his daughters, um, many others that don't come to mind at this very instant. They made throughout this transmission that we're having, but many, many others. Vic Arena, for example, he was a Colombo acting boss while Carmine Serpico was serving prison time. Incidentally, Vic Arena is still alive today. I believe he's 92 or 93 years old, but of course he's in prison and he will die in prison. As he once said to one of his associates, one of his co-defendants, after they were convicted and sentenced, he said, "Well, Jack, I got good news and bad news. Someday we'll get out of prison, but it will be in a pine box."
Hey, well, you'll get out one day, right? At least he knows
Precisely.
that we'll get out. Vicamuso, right?
Victor Musso, yeah. Um, Henry Hill, for example. Henry Hill, whom I collaborated on one of my books. Um, Unfortunately, Henry passed away before the book was published.
No, he did.
Presently, we're working on a possible deal for an adaptation of my Lufthansa Heist book for an adaptation for a television series. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that it does materialize, and it will be quite an interesting series.
So, how did you first run across Henry Hill? And what made you
Well,
want to get into writing his story?
I ran across Henry Hill many, many years later at a fundraising event. I just happened to attend this event I was invited to, and Henry happened to be there. I introduced myself, and I said, I would love to write a book in collaboration with you about the Lufthansa heist. And immediately he says, you know what? Good idea. we shook hands, we struck a deal right there and then, and the rest is history. We worked together for, I would say, 10, 11 months. And I completed the book. But as I mentioned a few minutes ago, unfortunately, he passed and never enjoyed the gratification of seeing the book published.
So what did you think of Henry as a person?
A screwball, a general screwball. Not at all the way he was cast in the film Goodfellas, played by Ray Liotta. Not at all. Henry was a little hustler, any type of hustle. He was not a racketeer. He was not a sophisticated racketeer, and he was not a sophisticated gangster. He didn't have the means or the backup to be a gangster. It so happened that Paul
Vario,
played in Goodfellas by Paul Sorvino, happened to taken Henry under his wing. Apparently liked Henry's charm and backed him in several criminal enterprises, which is very unusual for a copper regime that the Paul Vario was, to affiliate himself or to allow himself to collaborate and socialize with a lowly gangster who wasn't even an official made man.
And he wasn't Italian. He wasn't
Italian, so he couldn't be. So it was very unusual and extremely out of the ordinary for a capo like Paul Vario to have embraced Henry Hill, not only as a friend, as a father figure, but also as an associate, as a criminal associate. But Henry was grossly miscast in Goodfellas, played by Ray Liotta, who incidentally, Ray did a fantastic role. He was absolutely wonderful. He performed greatly, but that was not Henry Hill in real life.